There are stars who shine for a season, and then there are those who pay for their light with everything they have. Connie Francis was one of them. Behind her soft voice and picture-perfect smile was a woman molded by control, heartbreak, and survival. The world saw the glamour, but never the cost. Her story isn't about fame. It's about the price of obedience, the cruelty of an industry that feeds on innocence, and a voice that the world tried to silence more than once. The rise of America's sweetheart. Connie Francis was born Concetta Rosemarie Franconero on December 12, 1937, in Newark, New Jersey. Her father, George, a strict dreamer with big ambitions, decided early that his daughter would be a star. At 4, she was handed a child-sized accordion. By 9, she was performing on national TV, and at 17, she signed with MGM Records. Her early years were hard. The label almost dropped her after several failed singles. She often cried after sessions, terrified of disappointing her father. Everything changed in 1958 when she reluctantly recorded Who's Sorry Now, a song she didn't even like. At first, it flopped, until Dick Clark played it on American Bandstand. Overnight, it sold over 1 million copies and made her America's sweetheart at just 19. Hits like Stupid Cupid, My Happiness, and Lipstick on Your Collar followed, making her the best-selling female vocalist of the 1950s and 60s. But behind the fame stood her father, who controlled every decision and monitored every move. "My father believed discipline was love," she later said, "but to me, it often felt like fear." By 1960, Connie had achieved what most only dreamed of, starring in Where the Boys Are, performing worldwide, and recording in multiple languages. Yet the higher she rose, the lonelier she became. Her father screened her calls, rejected her suitors, and reminded her that love was weakness. Her voice filled the world, but her heart had no freedom. The forbidden love and the price of control. It began like a fairy tale. 2 young stars drawn together by music and laughter. In the late 1950s, Connie Francis met Bobby Darin, a witty and fearless songwriter who saw her not as a product, but as a woman. Their chemistry was instant, their bond undeniable. But one man would destroy it: her father. George Franconero despised Bobby from the start. When rumors spread that the two planned to elope, he stormed into a rehearsal and pulled a gun on Bobby, warning him to stay away. Soon after, Bobby married actress Sandra Dee. Connie heard the news on the radio and later said it felt like, "The world fell out from under me." Her father's control had protected her career, but cost her heart. Years later, when Bobby's marriage was failing, he reached out. Connie agreed to see him, hoping for closure, but instead found him with 2 other women. "It broke something inside me," she recalled. "It wasn't love anymore, just grief for what could have been." Her father's domination never stopped. He approved her clothes, her calls, even her dreams. When MGM cast her in Where the Boys Are in 1960, it wasn't her choice but his. The film was a success, yet behind the glamour was loneliness. "I was on top of the world," she later said, "and completely lost inside it." By the late 1960s, the music scene had changed. The British invasion made her sound feel outdated. Record executives pushed her toward softer ballads like My Child and Jealous Heart. Critics said she was fading, but in truth, she was just a woman outgrowing the cage that fame and her father had built around her. The night everything changed. By the early 1970s, Connie Francis was no longer the teenage darling of the 50s, but a veteran artist trying to stay relevant in a world that had moved on. The crowds were smaller, the lights dimmer, yet music still gave her purpose. Until November 8, 1974, when her life changed forever. That night, After performing at the Westbury Music Fair in Long Island, she returned to her room at the Howard Johnson Motor Lodge. Sometime after midnight, a masked man broke in, tied her up, held a knife to her throat, and raped her. The police found her bruised and shattered. The attacker was never caught. For months, she later said, I wished he'd killed me because surviving felt harder than dying. Her father's reaction was cruel. You're damaged goods, he told her. Her husband, Joseph Garzilli, tried to help but left soon after, unable to bear her pain. Connie withdrew from the world, bedridden and silent. She sued the hotel and won $2.5 million, a record case that changed hotel safety nationwide. But it brought her no peace. When she tried to sing again, her voice was gone. Surgeries failed to fix it. I lost my mind already, she said bitterly. And now I've lost my voice. The music industry turned away, calling her unstable. Frank Sinatra once invited her to sing Mama, but she refused, not out of pride, but because she couldn't. By 1978, she forced herself back on stage, performing on American Bandstand's 30th anniversary. It was an act of defiance, not triumph. That night in 1974 hadn't just stolen her peace. It exposed the dark truth she'd lived to tell. Fame can make you adored by millions, yet powerless to the people who own your life. The fall, the breakdown, and the battle for sanity. The late 1970s should have been Connie Francis's redemption. After years of silence and surgeries, her voice had returned, fragile, imperfect, but alive. She released new albums, dabbled in disco, and even recorded songs in multiple languages again. Fans rejoiced to see her on stage smiling through the pain, but no one truly understood how deep her wounds went. Every note she sang carried the echo of that hotel room in 1974. Every applause a reminder that survival sometimes feels like punishment. By the early 1980s, the cracks were impossible to hide. Depression consumed her. She began canceling shows, disappearing for weeks at a time. The same industry that once called her a miracle now called her unstable. Behind closed doors, she suffered panic attacks, insomnia, and waves of despair so heavy that even her faith, once her anchor, couldn't keep her afloat. Then came 1981, the year her world collapsed again. Her brother, George Franconero Jr., the man who had stood by her side through everything, was murdered outside his home in New Jersey. He had lived a complicated life. A lawyer by day, allegedly entangled with mob dealings by night, and his death bore the unmistakable mark of a professional hit. Connie got the call from her father, who told her simply, "Your brother's been shot." She asked which hospital he was in. "He's dead," he said. The line went silent. Her scream could be heard across the street. Losing George destroyed whatever was left of her fragile stability. She was already living under the shadow of trauma, and now grief tore away the last of her strength. Her father, desperate to maintain control, did what he had always done. He took over. He had her committed to a psychiatric facility, insisting it was for her own good. There, doctors misdiagnosed her with manic depressive disorder and prescribed aggressive medications that dulled her emotions and blurred her mind. The woman who had once conquered the world could barely recognize herself in the mirror. In her autobiography, Connie described those years as a fog of obedience. She obeyed doctors, nurses, and her father, just as she always had. When she cried, they sedated her. When she resisted, they restrained her. What had started as a bid for recovery became another prison. "I wasn't healing," she said later. "I was disappearing." In 1984, the weight became too much. Alone in her home, she swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills and fell into a coma that lasted 3 days. When she awoke, the first thing she saw was her father's face, the same man whose control had shaped her entire life. And in that moment, something shifted. She realized she didn't want to die. but she also didn't want to live under anyone's command ever again. That year, she published her autobiography, Who's Sorry Now?, where for the first time, she began to expose the reality behind the perfect image. She admitted to her suicide attempt, her breakdowns, and her father's suffocating control. She wrote, "My personal life is a regret from A to Z." The book was both confession and confrontation, her way of reclaiming the voice that fame, violence, and family had tried to erase. The press treated her like a curiosity, not a survivor. Tabloids ran headlines about her mental collapse, glossing over the courage it took to tell the truth. But slowly, something remarkable happened. Fans began writing letters, not of pity, but of gratitude. People who had suffered depression, abuse, and trauma saw themselves in her words. They thanked her for giving them language for their pain. Connie Francis had been the world's sweetheart, then its scandal, and now, finally, its truth-teller. She began speaking publicly about mental health, becoming a spokesperson for Mental Health America. Her speeches were raw, emotional, unpolished, and that's what made them powerful. She urged people to seek help, to fight the stigma, to believe that a shattered mind could still heal. "If I can survive," she said, "so can you." Yet, beneath the courage, the scars never fully faded. She often said that her fame had been both a blessing and a curse, a ladder to the heavens and a trap she could never escape. The industry had taken her youth, her privacy, and almost her sanity, but it could not take her will to rise again. The industry's silence, her voice of defiance. By the time the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, Connie Francis was no longer the young woman with the dazzling smile and endless optimism. She had lived through everything the industry never prepared her for: exploitation, violation, loss, and silence. But what set her apart was her refusal to vanish. When others expected her to fade into nostalgia, she turned her pain into purpose. She spoke openly about the music business, calling it a machine that feeds on youth and discards the broken. For years, she had stayed quiet out of fear of losing contracts, fear of her father's wrath, fear of being branded difficult. But now she had nothing left to lose. She revealed how labels had controlled her image, dictated her songs, and even rewrote her interviews to fit the narrative of a perfect American girl. She spoke about executives who had dismissed her trauma, who treated her assault as a public relations inconvenience. And she never forgot how the same media that once adored her had turned away when she needed them most. In the 1990s, she became an unlikely figure in American politics. Having seen firsthand how crime and violence destroyed lives, she aligned herself with conservative causes and Republican leaders who promised tougher laws for victims' rights. She testified before Congress, telling lawmakers about her 1974 assault and demanding stricter safety standards and mental health support for survivors. The hearing room was silent as she spoke. She wasn't the pop princess of the 50s anymore. She was a woman who had lost everything and still found the strength to fight for others. Her words carried a strange power because they weren't rehearsed. She didn't speak like a politician or an activist. She spoke like someone who had lived through hell and refused to let it be in vain. "I don't care about politics," she once said. "I care about people who were left behind, just like I was." Through her speeches and television appearances, she became a symbol of resilience. Yet the irony was cruel. The same industry that had helped destroy her now tried to reclaim her as a nostalgic icon. She was invited to talk shows, tributes, and Where Are They Now? Specials, where producers wanted her to sing her old hits and smile as if the past had never happened. Sometimes she played along. Other times she refused. "They want the old Connie," she told a reporter. "But she's gone." She also continued to battle health issues, Decades of stress and surgeries had taken their toll, and her voice was never the same. Still, she performed occasionally for charity and fan conventions, her fragile tone carrying more emotion than any perfect note could. "Every time I sing," she said, "I remember who I was, and how far I've come." But perhaps the most haunting irony of her story came in her final years. In 2025, more than 60 years after its release, her song, "Pretty Little Baby," a track she once dismissed as just a B-side, went viral on TikTok and Instagram. Millions of young people who didn't even know her name used her song to soundtrack their videos. She watched from her hospital room as it spread across the world. "It's a cute song," she told the New York Times. "I never thought it would mean so much to people now. Maybe it reminds them of innocence, something we've all lost." By then, her health had begun to fail. In late June, she was admitted to a hospital in Pompano Beach, Florida, after fracturing her pelvis. Complications followed: pain, immobility, and pneumonia. On the night of October 10th, 2025, the woman who had once made the world dance and dream quietly took her final breath at 87. Her longtime friend and publicist, Ron Roberts, announced the news. "It is with a heavy heart that I inform you of the passing of my dear friend Connie Francis last night. Her death came softly, but her legacy resounded loudly. She had been the best-selling female singer of her generation, a pioneer who opened doors for every woman who came after her. Yet what she left behind was more than music. It was truth, about fame, about control, and about the cost of silence. In the end, Connie Francis had lived long enough to tell her own story. Not the one the record labels wrote, not the one her father enforced, but the one she carved from pain, survival, and defiance. She had been broken by an industry that worships perfection, but redeemed by her refusal to hide the cracks. Connie Francis's voice may have faded, but her courage never did. She exposed the dark side of fame, the cost of silence, and the strength it takes to survive when the world forgets your humanity. What do you think was the hardest truth she faced? Fame, family, or fear? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more untold stories of the stars who paid the highest price for their light.